Hey guys, it's me, your buddy Icarus, and I'm here with the very first episode of Storytime with Icarus. I'm setting it to the backdrop of this desktop app called Mountain that I'm not going to try to call it a game. It's really more of just a self-driving. It's a procedurally generated video, essentially, of a mountain evolving, growing. You can zoom out and in. I think move the camera. Yeah, you can move the camera to look around, but I was doing this because it's probably the thing that would be the least distracting for me while still giving you guys something to look at other than just my face while I tell a story. With that explained, I've been wanting to do this series to start the series for a while, and it's going to be stories about my characters that you guys can watch if you find them if you're interested, and if not, leave them be. But first, I have to cover the story of the most important character of all. The world, the setting, which you can't have a story without one. Just to set the pace, the setting is our world, Earth, as we know it, or at least a little beyond what we know of it. I choose a near future setting of essentially Earth. But in my lore, for my characters, what we know of Earth is just one of multiple fragments, and the setting in question here is after a cataclysmic event has brought all the fragments back together. So there's new land yet undiscovered by humans. And from that land hail the dwarves, elves, all the fantasy races that would otherwise populate a typical fantasy setting. I was going to do the whole origin story, and probably should actually, for sake of pacing the video, because of the fact that as far as just explaining the setting well enough for you guys to understand what is important about it, I think I just did. It's basically our world with extra areas, extra places with home where these other races call home. Another distinction is the elemental planes taking the place of the religious extraterrestrial planes that are viewed, i.e. heaven is a plane of order, not a plane of light or goodness in my fantasy setting, just as hell is a plane of chaos. But why not get into the origin story as my fantasy lore puts it, just to make a bit more sense, a bit more time. Is it even recording anything? I don't think it is. Give me a minute. I'm gonna check whether. Okay, it wasn't updating very well, but it was recording. Sorry for the pause there, guys. With that, I'm gonna jump into origin story, and I'm probably going to try to make a link to the point when I started to put in the description, so you guys can just skip over all the stuttering and random nonsense there. So what happened in the beginning? In the beginning, matter was not a thing. Instead, energy. There was just free energy around the cosmos, around the universe, and certain pockets of that energy coalesced like water vapor into a heavy mist and gained sentience, just gained enough power that it gained a mind, gained thoughts. According to this fictional theory of creation, there are probably more than just our Earth, our Gaia, as worlds. And if someone wants to craft one of their own, they're more than welcome to. But in the case of my story, it all takes place on Gaia, where she took that identity, she crafted this shell for herself, this body, which is why I picked Mountain. It's basically a Gaia kind of thing, where life is just seemingly spawning from nothing, but that is the magic of creation, a power that mortals do not have access to. And first she created form. She created her earthen form around her. And with it the seas and oceans. But she didn't just want form. She wanted meaningful existence. She wanted life. Not for herself, but for something to exist beyond her. That's when she created the non-sentient animals that roamed the land, and her 5 original children, the divine beasts of the elements. Now this was still a time before language, before names. So as language developed, they took titles instead. There was the Anointer of the Winds, this who had taken the form of a large tiger with bladed fur. He would guide the annals of history and record them, keeping a library, but also serve as a reminder of how even the gentlest of forces can be fierce and dangerous when confronted. The Enchantress of the Seas. Before the moon's creation, she would maintain the rise and fall of the tides, the swelling of the ocean's force. The Invoker of the Land would ensure fertile soil would proceed to grow crops, and in turn be harvested. I forgot to mention the Enchantress's form is that of a serpent, and the Invoker a humanoid mantis. The lightning-wrought destroyer, a large lizard-like creature, yes, dinosaurs, yay dinosaurs, would simply ensure that energy would still fill the air and would travel to where it is needed. And then, finally, the last one she made, to keep the fires of life and passion burning, was the Immolator, when she reached out beyond herself and started crafting stars. The first star split in 2. Immolator had a sister. Now, she would wait until names actually became commonplace, and chose the name Sunfire. Both of the fiery phoenix birds ruled by their passions, though Immolator is more into the passion of anger, whereas Sunfire just is very playful and loves to have fun. So these divine beasts balanced the 5 elements, the 5 basic elements, as it were. But as with any siblings, there was quarreling among them. There was strife, and Gaia saw that there was danger in this. That there was a definite risk to the world, or to the smaller, weaker, mortal creatures of it, should these divine beasts interfere too much. And that's where the 6th child was born. Language had already developed as some of the animal races had evolved into anthropomorphized almost humanoid versions of their species. So he was given the name Itkensayer, which in the Elder language meant a barrier, as he was to serve as the barrier between the divine and the mundane. His powers over sealing magic were so great that he thought he was a god. He thought he was the one meant to rule over all things, when in truth he was merely meant to keep his siblings in check. Not seeing the problem, the danger inherent in the yet, Gaia went on her way, helping Itkensayer to create the first of the races that we know, the elves, the eldest kin. Now, the anthro races, the Vera as they came to call themselves, were instilled with an instinctual need to protect the mother, to protect Gaia against any threats they can. While the elves, if they were given any kind of genetic coding toward a predisposed mindset, it was to serve out her will, not her protection. And this is a very vital point for one character story later down the line, because people don't always will what is best for their own protection. But the first elf, for my own sake, and how much I liked the renditions of the character I've seen before, I named Behemoth. He would later go on to reincarnate himself in the body of a dragon, but for now, he was just an elf and meant to act as a balancing force for Itkensayer. Though mortal, he was created with an innate wisdom well beyond his years, and it was his job to help Itkensayer mold whatever creations he might make throughout the ages. With Behemoth's help, Itkensayer made more elves, created the dwarves in the mountains, the giants of the hills, and the Fae who would rule the skies. But thinking that creation was far too easy for him to worry about needing help all the time, Itkensayer was displeased and decided he wanted to make one thing, at the very least one, on his own. And thus came humans. Made by the White Lion without the assistance or consent of any others. We are the youngest, the most flawed, but at times the most interesting. Now, if this was the state of the world, way back when, in the origins of creation, what excuse does my world have for us humans not being familiar with all these fantasy races, that's it, Kensair. There and again. He knew that the only being truly more powerful than himself was the mother, was Gaia herself. And he knew that his siblings, who are instilled with this notion of protecting the mother against all threats, even their own, would have to be dealt with before he did anything else. He crafted a prison, called in common tongues the Halls of the Forsaken, in a space between dimensions, space between planes, and he bound his 5 siblings there. While Gaia, seeing this, was hard at work trying to counteract Ithkensair's plans, knowing she had the power to. She gave the elves the command to put the divines in check, to make sure that they knew that even the mighty lion knew that he had rules he had to follow as well. This spawned a war. A war that would eventually come to a stalemate, as Ithkensair did not have the power to kill on a grand scale. But what he did have was the power to defend, to block, to prevent any harm to come to him. Except when the mother unleashed a creature that was unaffected by seals of any kind. This being was the bloodborne shadow fox, which would not have its own lifespan, would not grow and survive and thrive upon the earth. It would instead just be a bestial form that an elf would play host to, that an elf would turn into if needed. Thinking he was cornered, Ithkensair then made servants to help him in the war. Between the forces that happened back and forth, it just bought time for Mother Gaia to make 2 more children. 2 more that would balance each other and the future. But it was already too late. Ithkensair did find turning points in the war by forcing the host of the Shadow Fox back, stripping him of his powers. And the 2 new children were bound by Ithkensair, just as he split and bound the 5 elements of the mother into 5 separate worlds. Now, that explains why the elves separated to the fragment, serving the power of water, the humans to our own world, Earth, that in my lore is the land of fire. The Fae still had the skies, the dwarves still had earth, the stone to work with, and the giants were delegated to the plane of fire, while the anthro races, those animals who had become sentient, they were split. The more fair and tame among them were taken by Ithkensair to heaven, where he would proceed to rule, while those he considered unclean or ill-behaved or really anything he could say against them. Any Vera who would not follow him were banished to hell. Now, I mentioned that this all takes place in a future where a cataclysmic event brought the fragments back together. This is true. The cataclysm was caused by what the various religions of the individual worlds would have termed their apocalypse, where a hero who would be deemed the villain by most religious standards would stand up and openly challenge the lion. He would have established himself as the one true God to most religious sources. The hero would challenge him. The hero would fall, but with that challenge would come some form of awakening, some damage to the seals, keeping the 5 fragments of Gaia separate. Once each world's hero had done their deed, the world would be made whole again, and no one on the mortal plane would have known why. Now, there were some events I glossed over there, but I'll go back to them as they become more relevant, because each and every event in the timeline, whether it happens long before a character's birth or not, does relate to some character or another. And while this has been a quiet and somewhat slow video, I hope you guys enjoyed it anyway. Next up, I might get talking about on the next Storytime with Icarus, I am most definitely going to tell you about Icarus himself, my character that I borrowed that I'm taking the name of for the channel. He is definitely not my most powerful, and sadly not my most liked among my friends' characters. But he's actually my favorite out of my whole roster, because he's proof that you don't have to be powerful or influential to make a good story. But that's a story for another day. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. Bye-bye for now.